So hi, everyone, and welcome for joining us. I am Britt Berner of Berner Prudenti Law, and we are here today to discuss aging at home. I'm going to cover different topics, including how to pay for care, what kind of documents you might need in place in advance of that time period where you are needing care, and differences between New York City and Long Island in some of the areas. If you do have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, sorry, not the chat, the Q&A on your screen, and I will get to the questions at the end. So again, thank you for joining us, Berner Prudenti Law. And I'm going to start by talking about estate planning. So when we're talking about aging at home, that looks very different for everyone, right? Some people are aging in an apartment in the city. Some people are aging in an apartment or a house out in a more suburban or rural area. And what is going to be available to each person is going to be different based upon where they are and what their family structure is, and also what assets they have, right? Because there's different ways that we pay for the cost of care. But there's one thing that is common regardless of all those assets, and that's the planning that you should have in advance of that time, so that you know that no matter what happens, if you lose your mental capacity, if you are unable to care for yourself completely, that you have put in place a team of individuals, some professionals, maybe just family members, who can help you during that time. That team often consists of a lawyer, although the lawyers probably comes more in and out as needed, perhaps a financial advisor, an accountant. It could include a geriatric care manager or somebody to manage your care at home, and can include, for some people, a daily money manager. If you don't have someone in your home who's available, or somebody in your family who's available to help pay bills and to be involved in terms of day-to-day running of your expenses, etc., some people utilize a professional in that position. But it really just depends on the care that you need and what your impairments might be. The way that you empower people to assist you during that time period is proper estate planning includes certain documents like a healthcare proxy, which says who makes medical decisions for you if you cannot make them for yourself. A healthcare proxy can name one person at a time, but can name multiple people to act in a hierarchy. So for example, if I'm unable to make medical decisions, either because of a short-term or a long-term incapacity, so it could be that I'm under anesthesia in surgery, and that's a short-term incapacity, or it could be a long-term incapacity, such as Alzheimer's, dementia, or other cognitive impairments, then I would say who makes medical decisions for me in that time. And if that person is unavailable or unwilling, then there's a second person, and you could have a third person. A healthcare proxy can be signed with any two witnesses, as long as they're not the people named in the document. And those two witnesses will sign and say that you signed in their presence and put their name, their address, etc. And then you have a valid healthcare document, a healthcare proxy document. You can change that at any time throughout your life. You can change who you want to serve, but you want to make it very clear that your agent knows your wishes regarding end-of-life decisions, artificial nutrition and hydration, and can make those decisions for you. So again, not only are you signing the document, but you're letting your agent know what to do, right? Because if you name someone to act for you, but you don't tell them what you would want or how to act, then you don't really know what's going to happen if you become incapacitated. And while we can't fully control that time period, the best way we can control it is by arming the agents that we name with the information they need to make the decision as close to what you would make for yourself if you could speak up and make that decision for yourself. And so that's what the healthcare proxy is. As people get older and as they get closer to end of life, either because of a diagnosis or sometimes just as someone gets older, a doctor says that it's possible that they could die within the next 2 years. Then there's something called a MOLST form, MOLST, Medical Orders of Life-Sustaining Treatment. That's actually a form that's filled out with your physician, and you fill out all of your wishes. Do you want to be intubated? That's the tube for breathing. If you can't breathe on your own, do you want to be intubated? Do you want cardiopulmonary resuscitation? That's the chest compressions, defibrillator. What kind of, at what point should you be brought to the hospital? At what point should you be left at home? All of your wishes can be put into this MOLST form, which you'll sign with your doctor, and it's actually a medical order. So it's not something you sign with the lawyer. But as you get closer to end of life, and especially for people who don't have someone to serve as their healthcare proxy, I have seen situations where this MOLST form can serve to speak up for someone in advance, when signed in advance of the time period in which they couldn't speak up for themselves. So we always prefer you to have a healthcare proxy, but if you really don't have someone that you feel comfortable naming, you can always have a MOLST form that would direct the medical professionals that were assisting you with how to behave in certain circumstances. Along with the healthcare proxy, we often sign a living will. A living will is further evidence to the fact that you will allow your agent to withdraw or withhold treatment if you're in an irreversible condition with no reasonable expectation of recovery. That is one type of living will. The general other type of living will would say, regardless of my condition and regardless of my ability to or likelihood of recovering, I would like you to keep providing these measures, and I do not give my agent the right to withhold or withdraw those treatments or to direct my physicians to do so. And so that's what a living will does, is it talks about if you are in that irreversible state, what kind of power are you conferring upon your agents, which are named in your healthcare proxy. Beyond healthcare, we also talk about a power of attorney. A power of attorney discusses who can assist you with financial and business aspects of your life. Now, this power of attorney can be wildly different from person to person, because the power of attorney law says that the only powers conferred upon the people that you've named, the only powers that they actually have, are the ones that you specifically list in the document. So if your power of attorney is very limited in scope, your agent might not be able to do some things for you. Now, different from the healthcare proxy, the power of attorney serves as in immediacy. So it is not something that relies upon your incapacity. So if I sign a power of attorney, I sign it in front of a notary and another witness. And then I have my agent sign saying, yes, I agree to act as your power of attorney, and they sign it in front of a notary. Well, then once that has happened, then that person can act on my behalf. I can still act on my own behalf. It's not taking power away from me. It's just creating a situation where my agent can also act. It duplicates my powers. So you want to make sure that you have a good, strong power of attorney, especially if you trust the agent that you're naming, so that if you do get to a point where you're later in life and you can't make decisions and you can't move assets around, that you have a power of attorney that allows someone to do certain planning for you that might become necessary, especially as we get a little bit further into the program and we start to talk about Medicaid and asset protection. Beyond the power of attorney, there's also a will and a trust. Wills are not going to have anything to do with you aging in place at home, because a will only describes what happens with assets after your death. And if you want to learn more about wills, we have plenty of programs you could watch about what a will is and what happens when someone has a will and they die, etc. There's also a trust, which is a little more relevant, because a living trust is in effect while you are living. And depending on how that trust is written and what the terms of it say, then some of that money might be available to you when you're aging at home to pay for certain services, or some of that money might be outside of your control and not able to be used for you. And the purpose of that would likely be if we were looking to do Medicaid planning so that those assets in the trust wouldn't count as your asset for Medicaid planning. And I'll get onto that as I get a little further into the program as well, how we use trusts for Medicaid planning. But if you have a regular standard revocable trust where you're in control of it, it's your social security number, that is not going to provide you with any protection in terms of Medicaid. It will merely avoid probate upon your death. And while that's fantastic, and those assets can be used to take care of you, it's not sheltering those assets for Medicaid purposes. So if you are looking into creating a trust, you want to understand what your end game is, what your goal is, so you can figure out what's the best type of trust for you and how it should be drafted. So when we talk about how to pay for this care at home, there's three main ways that people pay for care later in life. They self-fund, right? Which just means you pay for it, right? You're paying the home health attendant, you're paying the PT, the OT, anything not covered by your Medicare, you're paying for out of pocket. There's long-term care insurance, which if you have it or people who have it, it's very varied in terms of what it will cover. So for some people, it's $100 a day for 3 years. For other people, it's $450 a day for 5 years or for a lifetime. For some people, it's a policy that as soon as you can't do 2 out of 6 activities of daily living on your own, it just starts sending you monthly money. Others, you have to pay for the services out of pocket, and the long-term care insurance is a reimbursement of that. So everyone's plan is different. If you have a long-term care policy, it's incredibly important to have that policy reviewed and to make sure you understand what it does. Because if you don't understand your policy, it's very hard to know when to invoke it, right? When do I trigger this policy into being so that it's all is not lost if I don't use it, right? So you really want to understand what are the benefits of your policy, what are the potential downfalls, and when you look at that in terms of the rest of your financial picture, when is the best time to use that money? And again, it's going to be very different from person to person. There are some people who have a long-term care policy that we call a partnership plan, New York State partnership plan. And this means that if you utilize your policy, so say you have $300 a day, it says it's max $300 a day for a max of 3 years. At the end of that 3 years, all of your assets are deemed protected for Medicaid. This is a very specific type of long-term care policy. Again, it's a partnership plan, and it's you are in partnership with the state of New York, and that was the deal, right? I'm going to pay for a few years of my own care with this long-term care policy, and then state, thank you, you've agreed to kick in after that with my assets being protected. And so if you do have a partnership plan, again, you really want to understand what it is providing to you and what other planning you might need around that to make sure that your desired result will be achieved. The last way that we pay for care, long-term assistance, is through the Medicaid program. Medicaid has 2 main programs when it comes to long-term care: community and chronic. Community is when you receive your care while living in the community, right? So they're paying for home health aides, transportation to doctor's appointments. And then chronic is when you're receiving long-term care assistance. So Medicaid is helping to pay for your bill living at a nursing home. So community versus chronic. So I'm out in the community, I'm living, I have other expenses that I'm using my income for, but Medicaid's paying for my home health aid, and then chronic when I need to be in a nursing home. In either case, for most individuals who are 65 and older, they already have Medicare. right? Medicare is the primary insurance. Medicare stays the primary insurance. Medicare pays for home care, limited home care when you're first released from a hospital or a rehab facility, very short period of time, and limited and in hours as well. Medicare has pays for doctors, hospitals, rehabilitation. You'd have a Medicare drug plan. Medicare is the primary insurance. And even if somebody goes on Medicaid for this long-term care, they are what we call a dual eligible. They're eligible for both programs. And you keep Medicare as your primary insurance. So a lot of people get very nervous when we start to talk about Medicaid because they don't want to lose their doctors, right? They don't want to have to go to a doctor that is a Medicaid provider because they're a lot harder to come by and they probably have a relationship with their physicians at that point. Don't worry, you can keep your Medicare and that will remain as your primary. Medicaid is what we call your payer of last resort. They pay for some of the things that the other insurances don't pay for. So now let's talk a little bit about the nursing home Medicaid, mostly because I want you to understand the rules for community Medicaid, and I think it's easier to do it in the context of the nursing home first. If somebody goes to a nursing home, Medicaid and asks Medicaid to help pay for the cost of that care, and just so you know, in Manhattan and out onto Long Island, you're looking at anywhere between usually 15 and 20,000 or more per month for the cost of that care. Then what happens is you submit an application for Medicaid and you say, I'm eligible. It's the first of the month and I am eligible. And if you go back 5 years, I didn't give anything away. And so you might have heard about the 5-year look back. That's what it is. It's you saying to Medicaid, I would like you to pay for some of my care. Medicaid saying, okay, let's go back 5 years and make sure you didn't give anything away. Now, if you spent it because you were paying for home health aides, you went on a vacation, you bought yourself a car, whatever it is that you spent it on, that's okay as long as you weren't giving those as gifts to others, right? So you can pay for your own vacation, but if you buy someone else a vacation, that's a gift. If you gave someone money, if you gave money away to a trust, these are all gifts that might disqualify you for Medicaid for a period of time. So assuming we go back 5 years, there's no transfers during that time period of concern, then Medicaid will assist with your payments. Now, for most people, what happens is they give their income to the facility and Medicaid pays the balance. So if all you have is Social Security for $1,200 per month, then your cost for that nursing home is $1,200 per month. If you are somebody with a large pension, a big source of income, and you have $6,000, let's say a month in income, well, then your price for that same care is $6,000. You give your income to the facility, Medicaid pays the balance. That is how the nursing home works. Now, obviously at home, it can't work the same way because you need your income, right? Because Medicaid might be paying for some of your care, it's health insurance, but it's not paying your rent, your mortgage, your maintenance, your real estate taxes, your landscaping, whatever the costs of you living at home are, Medicaid is not covering that. And so therefore you need your income. And so it works differently when you're at home. Now, that Medicaid limit for both home and nursing home is that in assets, you're allowed to have $31,175 in assets. That means you're checking your savings bonds. If you have a whole life insurance policy or any life insurance policy with cash value, that counts. That has to be under $31,175. In addition to that, you can prepay for your funeral. You would get an irrevocable prepaid funeral contract with a funeral home. You can, and so you can have that on the side. You can also have tax deferred retirement. So let's say somebody has 30,000 in the checking and 300,000 in their retirement account. that's fine, right? Because they're allowed to have the 31,175 and their checking is under that. And they're allowed to have the tax deferred retirement. So their IRA is okay. That's for assets. But if that same individual now wants to get home care, we have to look at their income. So for income purposes, you're allowed to have $1,752 in monthly income. So Social Security, pension, required minimum distributions from that $300,000 retirement account. If you have put a brokerage account in a trust, for example, and you're getting the income, that would count. Whatever sources of income you get, they're considered on a monthly basis and they count. So what Medicaid does is they say, okay, if you have $4,000 in income, we're gonna say that 1,752 is okay, it's protected, it stays in your checking account, just where it was deposited. You can do whatever you want with it. But the difference between the 4,000 and that 1,752, the amount that's over, goes into what's called a pooled income trust. A pooled income trust is a type of trust that is run by a charity that the state has certified to do so. And the deal is, okay, you can put that extra income in the pool trust every month. And you can use it, you could pay all those things I said, your food, your rent, your maintenance, your mortgage, your landscaper. You can use that money for yourself, but yourself only, not for anyone else. But as long as you're using that money for yourself, then there's no problem. That money stays in the pool trust. If you don't use it in a given month, it will accumulate to the next month. And then at the time of your death, whatever is in that account is lost to the charity. So the idea is that you want to spend that monthly income because then the balance you're going to lose at death. So just to illustrate it, you've got your checking account with less than the 31,175 in it. You've got your $300,000 retirement account. And then all your income is coming into that checking account every month. And then the amount that's over, so the amount, anything above 1,752 is going to your pool trust. And then you're spending it out of your pool trust. You're submitting bills and the pool trust is paying those bills. And that's how people are able to stay at home, have Medicaid help pay for their home care, but also have the use of all of their income to pay all their other bills. Now, there's a lot of things that are different between Long Island and New York City when it comes to planning. And one of the differences is how they calculate the distributions from a retirement account. So take that same $300,000 IRA and you have an 82-year-old. In New York City, they say that the IRS says you have a required minimum distribution, and based on the fact that you're 82, your monthly distribution is $1,352 on that account, and that's all you have to take every month, and that counts as your income. Now, as a difference to that, some counties, and Suffolk County being one of them, some counties say that the Department of Social Services has its own actuarial table, its own life expectancy table, and they determine actually that you will die sooner, which makes your life expectancy smaller, which makes your distributions larger. And so as an example, that same 82-year-old who in New York City is only taking $1,352 per month from their retirement account, if they were to be out there, if they're a male, they have to take $3,592. So that's over $2,000 more. Or for a female, they have to take $3,027. Now, another interesting difference is that in counties like Suffolk County, they actually say that if you're single, you have to take it on this life expectancy chart with the Department of Social Services. But if you're married, you can do what the IRS says. So for a single female in Suffolk County, they have to take 3,027. But if they were married or if they lived in the city, they would only have to take 1,352. So that's a big difference that's based on where you live. So it's really important to understand the local rules, because in the end, when you're applying for Medicaid, you're applying to the county that you live in, and that's who's determining your application and your eligibility. Another difference is the spousal contribution. Here in the city, we have to be very careful, because even with spousal refusal, which is one spouse has money, the other spouse doesn't have money, and the spouse without money can go on Medicaid without a problem. In New York City, if the spouse is over that amount, the city has its right to ask the spouse as the legally responsible relative for contribution. So if the spouse with the money has more than $154,140, then the city can come back and say, you have more than the allowable limit, and we would like you to give us some, because we want you to help pay for the cost of your spouse that we're paying for right now. And so again, I just say that to stress the importance of understanding your local laws, your local rules, and how it might affect your application in different ways, depending on where you live. So now, once you are at the point where you're on Medicaid because you've been financially approved, you have home care, I want to add that for the nursing home, remember we said there's a 5-year look back. So 5-year look back, meaning they go back 5 years and they say, what did you give away? Currently, if you were to apply for Medicaid in New York, there is no look back for home care. So if you have home care, then you didn't have to submit those 5 years of statements. Now, there was a law that was passed that said that there would be a 2.5-year look back for home care, but it is not in effect currently. Our best information from the Department of Health is that it won't be in effect until at least the end of 2025, but it still requires federal approval. So just keep checking back, and we'll certainly write an article if we hear anything, but there is still no look back for home care Medicaid. That's just important to understand, because I think if you Google it, there's some different information out there. So you want to make sure that you're looking at that. Then once the care is in, once the financials are approved, then we figure out what care you need, right? So some people will go with a Medicaid funded agency. So it's an agency that has a number where it can bill Medicaid for the home care services, and that they will send nurses into your home. Medicaid they will determine the number of hours Medicaid is willing to pay for your care. Some people get 4 hours a day, some people get 6, some people get all the way up to 24/7. It depends on your level of need, and it depends on what activities of daily living you need assistance with. And that's how they determine how much care they'll provide to you. It's important to have a good advocate at those meetings, because, and that's where a lot of times clients are using a care manager, because if you have someone advocating who knows the system, who understands what to highlight about your medical condition, then you can also, be more successful in getting the care you need. It's also really important to understand that if you are the caregiver, your spouse, let's say, and you're living at home with your spouse and your spouse needs help, you have to also point out during those nursing assessments what your own issues are. Because, for example, I had one spouse, the husband was a pretty big guy. He was 6'3", wasn't very slight. And the wife was a much smaller person in size, and she wasn't able to be his caregiver. She wasn't able to assist him because physically it was too hard for her. And not only was it hard because he was taller and bigger than she was, but in addition, she had back problems. So if you don't explain to them, I understand that I live here and I'm his legally responsible relative, but I physically can't assist him because I have all these issues, That's really important for them to understand so they can see what really needs, what help the household needs. So it's really important to get that information out properly and to discuss it with the nurses who are doing the assessments so they understand the real need for care. We never tell anyone to be dishonest. We never tell anyone to lie, but we certainly want the assessor to know what's going on behind those walls and where the care is that's needed. And you just need to know how to highlight that. And a lot of us don't want to admit where we need help or admit where we can't do things on our own. So it's really important that you have someone there who can help advocate for those things for you. The other option is the the consumer-directed program. Now, the consumer-directed program is basically one by which someone who's not a licensed health aide, it can be a friend, a family member, as long as it's not a spouse, etc. Someone who is not a licensed home health aide can sign up to be paid through the Medicaid program. I always think of this as creative for the person from the church, the person from the synagogue, the person from down the block who started checking in on you once a week, and the next thing they knew, they were there every day for 4 hours. These are the people who end up serving as these informal caregivers, and to give it some formality and to compensate them for the work they do, they can sign up to be an aide through the consumer-directed program. And so that's an important way that a lot of people receive their care, especially if you live in an area that is less likely to have home health aides. So here in Manhattan, obviously we have a lot of public transportation. There's more availability for home care workers. However, once we're out on the East End, Shelter Island, the Hamptons, or even if you don't go that far, a lot of the places out in Suffolk County, it's a lot harder to get a caregiver in your house, especially if you only have 4 days awarded to 4 hours a day awarded to you of care, because there's not someone who has the transportation or the willingness to drive to you, work for 4 hours, and then drive an hour or two home or to another job. And so it can be a lot harder to find caregivers sometimes when we're outside of the city environment. And that's when we often use the consumer-directed program, because it allows you to be a little creative with who can help provide the care. I'm going to pause now and see if there's any questions, so feel free to put them in the Q&A. I don't see any questions at the moment. Someone has a question. Okay, feel free to type it right there in the box. Oh, there's a question. Does the advocate at a Medicaid meeting have to be a professional? It does not have to be. Certainly not. We have certain clients that do have a professional that they use, and then others are just a lot of times when we're working with people, we'll kind of coach whoever's going to be there so that they understand what the needs are and what to be said, right? So again, I'll never tell someone to lie, but there's certain things that really need to be highlighted. And I think a lot of times people don't know exactly what they should be highlighting. And sometimes, again, it can be a little embarrassing to explain to a stranger exactly what it is you need help with. So it does not have to be. The content, we usually post our webinars on the website after the fact. Someone asked that question. Can you get answers to questions by speaking to Medicaid or Medicare directly instead of a law firm? Most certainly. Not everybody needs a lawyer in this circumstance. The question is, what's the assets we're looking to protect? You know, I was gonna talk about trusts once I'm done taking these questions, so I will do that next. But I believe that, there's a lot of great resources out there. A lot of times there's social workers through a facility, if you're in a hospital or if you're in rehab, who can help you understand the program. I'm sure there's help numbers within the local Department of Social Services in New York City, that's HRA, where you can get information. There's also the New York Legal Assistance Group, which is a law group here in the city who actually assists, if you meet their income and asset criteria, they can assist you with Medicaid issues. They also keep really great information on a website that they maintain called New York Health Access. I believe it's through the Empire Justice Center, and you can get a lot of information there, but you can certainly get information other places. For home care, does Medicaid need to get paid back from house sale after death? I'm going to talk about trusts and I will hit that question in a second. Am I familiar with any senior advising programs or individuals on Long Island that can help with seniors who might not have the ability to stay at home for care and might need to go to a skilled nursing facility? I am not aware of anything like that. Senior advising program. I don't know of any senior advising program who will help you find a nursing home. That I'm not aware of. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about trusts, and that will cover this question about the house. So a lot of times when people are applying for Medicaid, we want to make sure that if they do have some assets that we handle them, right? Because there's no point in applying for Medicaid and then just being rejected because your assets are over the limit. So when I said you're allowed to have $31,175 plus your retirement assets, you can have certain other assets too, but that's on eligibility. So for example, you're allowed to have a house and in your name when you apply for Medicaid, as long as that house is worth less than about $1 million. So if you have a house that's worth $500,000, you have $30,000 in your checking, you've got your $300,000 retirement, you are eligible for Medicaid. The problem is exactly the issue brought up by this question, which is the problem being that if upon your death, that house is in your name, it will have to go through probate. And if it goes through probate, Medicaid is a creditor. And so you want to avoid probate, because if you avoid probate on your assets, Medicaid will not claw back from the sale of the property or from the property after your death. So it's very important that not only are you prepping for eligibility, but you're also looking down the line at what the rules are in terms of asset collection after death. And so to also answer the question about if you need to talk to a lawyer, if you're looking to apply for Medicaid and you're eligible, you probably don't need the assistance of a lawyer for everything, because it's a matter of putting the application together. But the more complicated your estate is, if you have a house that's in your name, if you have retirement assets and you want to understand what's going to happen with them, if you want help with the pool trust and etc., it gets more complicated and it's harder to get assistance on those things because you might not fall in the category of what some of these free services assist with. So certainly if you have a house, you should be doing proper planning so that there is not a clawback from Medicaid on that house. For most cases, especially because of the concern for the potential nursing home in the future, we often have clients create an irrevocable Medicaid asset protection trust. This is a type of trust where you're the creator. All the assets in the trust are taxed to you. However, you cannot be the trustee, so you can't be in control of the trust assets. Your spouse cannot be the trustee, but your children could, your niece, your nephew, you can have whomever you want as long as it's not you or your spouse. And that trust has to say that while you can get income, right? So you can get, let's say I have a house that I rent out, or I have a 2-family and it's in the trust, and I get rental income from one side. That's fine, you can get the rental income. But if the house is sold, the money that's in the trust from the sale is principal and can't be used for your benefit. And it makes sense if you think about it, because what Medicaid is saying is you have your money sitting in this trust and you can't access it. And that's what makes it protected, because if you could access it, Medicaid would say, well, great, then go ahead and use it to pay for your care. Why are we paying? And so there has to be an inability for you to use the assets in the trust or for them to be used for you. If you're thinking about doing a trust like this, you should definitely seek the assistance of a lawyer. And I go back to that with the question that was asked earlier about when you need a lawyer, because there are tax implications to what you're doing with your house. There's a lot of different types of taxes, right? There's real estate taxes. There are capital gains taxes upon sale. There's estate taxes for assets of a certain value. And so you never want to transfer a big asset like that without the assistance or the advice of an attorney, because you could really end up harming the person you're giving the property to instead of helping them. And there might be a better way. So it's very important to get proper advice on that if you are going to start transferring assets. There is a question about how Roth IRAs are treated as assets by Medicaid. So for those who don't know, Roth IRAs do not have required minimum distributions. In a traditional IRA and other retirement accounts, that is fully untaxed money, and therefore there's required minimum distributions that force you to pay income tax when a distribution is taken. On the Roth IRAs, it's different. So the income taxes have been paid and they continue to grow tax deferred. For Medicaid purposes, a Roth IRA is treated just as a regular IRA is. And what they will do is they will use those same life expectancy tables and they will calculate a distribution amount. And while it's not a required minimum distribution from the plan or a required minimum distribution from the IRS, Medicaid requires you to take the distribution as if it were mandatory in order to qualify for Medicaid benefits, and those will be counted as income. And so if you're in a nursing facility, remember the income goes to the facility, and if you're at home, your excess income goes to the pooled income trust. I'm finished with the substance of our talk for today. However, I'm happy to answer any other questions that might come up. I thank you all for joining us. We really enjoy bringing education out to the public. You can look for us in maybe a local venue for an in-person event or come visit us online again. Thank you so much, and I hope everyone has a great day. Bye.